All right, y'all. So this is gonna be the last. It's gonna be the last part of Volume Two of this rather extensive volume. Um, like I said, I know that this volume has been pretty extensive, but for number one, not all the volumes are gonna be this long. I know, like I said, I know this series has been kind of long, but this volume won't be, or other volumes won't be this long. And for number two, really all of the things that I've been doing have been, necessary. So that's why this volume has been stretched out so much. But this is the last part of volume two. So let's get into it. So this is a coin of a man that I've referenced a few times on this series. The man named Canute the Great. Okay, the ruler of the unified Anglo-Saxon kingdom in England. I believe he ruled from 1016 to 1035, and then he also ruled in he ruled over most of the Scandinavian provinces as well. So he ruled in Denmark, which is where he hailed from because he was Danish, right? So he was a Dane or a Dub Ginty. Okay, so he came from Denmark, and he ruled Denmark as well as Norway and then parts of Sweden. So he ruled most of the countries that reside in the near the North Sea. Hence why his empire was called the North Sea Empire. So yeah, so he was a very legendary figure in Scandinavian history. Okay, so and once again he ruled those provinces for about 19 years, from 1016 to 1035. So, but anyway, so I just want to take a look at this coin real quick here, just to even further accentuate that the Vikings, particularly the Danes, right? Because once again, Canute was a Dane. So once again, he was a Dane or a Dub Ginty, and as we can see from this coin, this looks like a brother right here. You can see the large pronounced nose, the lips right here. I don't know if these are braids or not. These look like braids to a degree, or this may be a headdress, but we can look at this coin and see that Canute the Great. I mean, this looks like a so-called black man. All right, but I just wanted to establish that before I get into what I really want to get into, which is Canute's name. Okay, so Canute's name, Sanute or Canute, was a very common Scandinavian name, particularly a very common Danish name, and a name that sprung forth from Canute or Sanute is a name that a lot of so-called black people have today, known as Nut, right? Spelled Nutt. So now let's look at what the term nut means, and let's confirm that the term nut does in fact derive from Canute or Sanute. So here we are at the House of Names website. So as we can see, Nut history, family crest and coat of arms. So now let's read this right here. As we can see, origins available, or origins, England, Ireland. So the name Nut was primarily an Anglo-Saxon name. Okay, so, and obviously that derives from Canute or Sanute, who once again ruled Anglo-Saxon England during the early 11th century. Okay, so, but let's read what this name Nut means and where it derives from. So the Anglo-Saxon name Nut comes from Sanute, a popular name in England in the early Middle Ages. It was popular thanks to the influence of Sanute, a Dane, who became King of England in 1016. There are two Sanutes in Domesday, one in Yorkshire and another in Derbyshire. So Doomsday, that was a chronicle that was written by William the Conqueror, if I'm not mistaken. But let's read what the word nut means. Let's read the definition of the word nut. Alternatively, it may be of nickname origin from the Old English word hinutu, which meant brown, and would have been given to someone with a brown complexion. It may be that this is the origin of the English saying brown as a nut, used for someone who has spent a lot of time in the sun. So they're trying to use the sun thing again to try and to try and explain away why somebody who would be named Nut, right, or who would have that name applied to them, would be called Nut due to them having a brown complexion. But as we've already read, Sanute being a Dane, as it even states up here, he had to have been of the descent of the quote-unquote Dub-Ginty Danes, right? So guys like Ivar the Boneless and Ragnar Lodbrok, who I'll even show a picture of a little bit later, those were quote-unquote Danes, and they were regarded as the black Gentiles or the black foreigners, right? Dub-Ginty and Dub-Gaul. So Sanute comes from that same lineage, okay? Comes from that same lineage. So Sanute was of the Dub-Ginty ancestry or descendancy. Okay, so this word nut, which sprung forth from his name, obviously means a brown complexion, or is meant to imply somebody who has a brown complexion, because the person who the name Nut sprang forth from must have had, a brown or a dark brown complexion as well, because as it even states down here, this name is the origin of the saying "brown as a nut." So, anybody who's ever seen a nut, you know that a nut is like dark brown, or it's a darker shade of brown, right? So, we know that this name, or at least we should know that this name was applied to, sprung forth from Canute, as a way to imply that the person who was sprung forth from was somebody who had a quote unquote brown complexion or a darker skin complexion. Okay, but let's look at another definition of the word nut, or of the name Nut. So now, Nut surname definition. This surname is derived from the name of an ancestor, the son of Sanute or Canute, found in the 13th century as Note. Okay, so what this definition should tell us is that a lot of you guys who have that last name Nut, a lot of you guys quite possibly could be the descendant of Canute or Sanute, because as we see here, this is a surname that derived from an ancestor. So this was a surname that was applied to a descendant of, or a son of, Canute or Sanute, right? And once again, that last name means brown complexion. So if you're somebody who's so-called black and you got that last name Nut, that's your real last name. Okay? That's your real last name. It wouldn't make sense for a last name like that means brown complexion, to have been given to you by some slave master that was quote unquote Caucasian or white. Because why would they have a name that implies brown complexion or brown skin complexion when they themselves don't have that when they themselves don't exhibit that same physical characteristic, right? So that's your real last name, and it could imply that you are in fact a descendant of Canute or Sanute. All right, so now let's just read a couple more definitions of the word nut. Let me see here. All right, so now we're on Ancestry.com, so let's read this. English from Middle English, note, nut. Nut, either a metonymic occupational name for a gatherer and seller of nuts, or a nickname for a man supposedly resembling a nut. So once again, a nut is like dark brown, right? Or at the very least, it's brown. So for example, having a round head and brown complexion. So if you guys remember the round-headed definition, or the round-headed designation that was applied to the cephalic index term brachycephalic, right? Brachycephalic equaled what? Round and short heads. And we already saw who the vast majority of the quote unquote brachycephalic people were, whether it be the Black Mongolians, the Andaman Islanders, some of the skulls that were found in the Kiss of Caithness, right, which is in northern Scotland, that was inhabited mainly by the Picts, right, the Picts of northern Scotland. We already read, according to Gildas, were quote unquote dusky skinned, and the word dusky was a word that was applied along the lines of Negro, which of course means a black person. So that word dusky skin just means somebody who's so-called black, right? Or that's what it meant. So once again, we see round-headed or rounded head. That's equal to brachycephalic, and all the brachycephalic people that we've seen, according to the cephalic index, were black people. All right, and then of course, brown complexion. Okay, so once again, that last name, Nut, it means brown complexion. So let's look at one last definition here. All right, meaning. Let me wait for this to go away. All right, so meaning of Nut is Nut a female or a male name, and what is the origin of Nut? Nut is a surname or last name, and origin is English or Anglo-Saxon. Nut means English or Middle English. Note, nut, either a metonymic, occupational name. So this is basically the same definition as Ancestry.com, but once again, round-headed, round complexion. All right, so a lot of you guys will be surprised at just how many last names that black people have, or that a lot of black people in this country have, quite literally mean black. Okay, names like Duncan, right? Duncan, if I'm not mistaken, means a brown-skinned nobleman or a brown-skinned chieftain. Okay, Duncan was a name that was held by the cousin of a very famous Scottish ruler named Macbeth. Right, Macbeth. Some of you may have heard of him. Shakespeare wrote a play about Macbeth, or the tragedy of Macbeth, I believe it's called. And just as an aside, even in the movie, the most recent movie that was made about that play Macbeth, or the tragedy of Macbeth, in the movie they had Denzel Washington playing Macbeth, and that was actually an accurate depiction of Macbeth, because once again, Macbeth was the cousin of Duncan the First, right? So once again, the name Duncan the First means a brown-skinned nobleman or a brown-skinned chieftain, if I'm not mistaken. So, and of course, Duncan would have been considered a chieftain or a nobleman because he was a Scottish king, so he was of noble descent, right? So that name was meant to imply that he was a so-called black person or a black man. Okay, so the name Duncan, that word means black. The name Dwayne, right, like Dwayne Johnson or Dwayne Wade from the Miami Heat, that name Dwayne quite literally means black as well. Okay, another name that means black, or that implies somebody who's black or brown, is the name Donovan. Okay, like Donovan Mitchell from the Utah Jazz. Donovan, that name means like a brown-skinned warrior, if I'm not mistaken, or a dark-skinned warrior, something along those lines. But you can go and look that up. Okay, and then other names like Murray, right, like Kyler Murray or Jamal Murray, right? Morris. Let me think. Moreau, the last name Moore, Moore. All those last names derive from the same Latin word that I think I referenced earlier, Morris, spelled Maurus, right? Morris, all that word Morris means is black, literally. So all those other names, all they mean is black. Okay, we already went over the surname Douglas as well. Douglas just was a name that was meant to imply somebody who was a so-called black man. Okay? And then you had other words too, or other names too, like Blake, right? Blake means black, right? Like the brother who unfortunately got shot in the back a couple years ago, Jacob Blake. Of course, he was a so-called black man, and he had that last name, Blake, applied to him, right? Or that last name Blake was his last name, of course. So, and then you have other so-called blacks from along the Caribbean that have that last name Blake, like Johan Blake, the runner or the sprinter on the Jamaican team, right? I think he runs beside Usain Bolt, or he ran beside Usain Bolt in the Olympics. Johan Blake, of course, he's a so-called black man, and he has that last name Blake. And then one last nickname. There's so many surnames that mean black. Okay, there's so many surnames that mean black or brown or dark, but one last surname that means brown or dark or black that I can think of right now off the top of my head is the last name Brunson, right? Like that brother who plays on the Dallas Mavericks, Jalen Brunson. That last name Brunson quite literally means brown. Okay, so once again, a lot of you guys will be surprised at just how many last names quite literally mean dark or brown, or somebody of a dark or brown complexion. Okay? And it's only then, once you guys start to comprehend that kind of stuff, it's only then that you'll be able to realize that not all of us, of course, a certain number of us did derive from quote unquote slaves, and a lot of us were subjugated to slavery. I'm not trying to deny that, but it's only until you understand the history of your of things like your surname or your last name that you start to understand that that's not our whole history. All right. We did not receive most of our last names from slave masters. Please understand that. Okay, but that's going to be another video for another day. But just please always keep that in mind. So, but just going back to the name Nut, once again, the name Nut derives from Sanut. And the name Nut means a brown complexion, or somebody who has a brown complexion. Okay, so if that last name derived from Sanut or Canute, and it implies a brown complexion, what does that tell you about Sanut or Canute? Right? So yeah. So let's just move on real quick here. So now I just want to show proof that the other Scandinavian tribes outside of the Danes, right? Because we've already been able to prove pretty much beyond a shadow of a doubt that the Danes, for the most part, were quote unquote black, or dubbed Ginti, right? Black Gentiles or what have you. So we've been able to prove that for the most part. But I just want to even further prove that the other Scandinavian tribes, that being the tribes or the Scandinavian tribes from Sweden and Norway, were also so-called black, or they had an element of so-called black within their tribes as well, even though, like the Norwegians, for example, were regarded as the Fingal, or the fair foreigners, right? So they were regarded as the fair, or what we would call quote unquote white or Caucasian, whatever you want to call it, foreigners. But let's just read real quick here, or let's just see real quick here that there was a element of so-called black even amongst the Norwegians and the Swedes. All right, so now we're at the person named Halfdan the Black. Okay, now let's read what his real name was according to the Norse language. So Halfdanar Svarti. All right, so that's going to be the operative word that we're going to look up. Okay, Svarti. So 9th century, was the king of Vestfold. He belonged to the house of Yngling and was the father of Harald Fairhair, the first king of unified Norway. So as it states right here, Halfdan the Black derived from the house of Yngling. So the house of Yngling, for those of you who don't know, was the very first Swedish royal house. Okay, the House of Yingling was said to have been founded by quote unquote Odin, but oftentimes they'll use the name of like a mythological godlike figure to represent an actual person who lived, but they'll use the name Odin or whatever just to act as like a fill-in name for that person. But the House of Yingling was said to have been quote unquote founded by Odin, right? But as I already stated, it was the first Swedish house of Sweden, or the first royal Swedish house of Sweden. So just keep that in mind. And then he was the father of Harald Fairhair, who was the first king of unified Norway. Okay, so Harald Fairhair was the first unified king of Norway. So now and he was the son of Halfdan the Black. So now let's just look at what that name or what that word Svart means. So Svart, adjective Svart, Svartar. So adjective or a descriptive word, black, right? So somebody who's being described as being quote unquote svart or svarti is black, right? And then etymology, from Old English svarter, from Proto-Germanic swartas, from Proto-Indo-European swardo, dirty black or dirty dark black. Okay. Swarte or swart, to be black in color. Alright, so now let's look at some other words that are listed here. So from Old Norse svarter. Okay, so as we can see here, dirty, dark, black. Svarter just means black. So all these words just basically mean black, okay? So now let's look at another definition of the word svarti. So this is the word svarti right here, and then Dolby or Dewey, I don't know how to pronounce that, but svarti Dewey, meaning black death, right? So the word svarti, of course, is the name, as we can see over here. Etymology, from svartar, meaning black, Dewey meaning death. So the Black Death, that's gonna be another video as well for another day. The quote unquote Black Death, or the bubonic plague or what have you. That's gonna be another story for another day. But so once again, svarti means black. So now let's look at one last thing real quick here. So Swedish to English. So svart, black, Negro, black. All right, so this right here defines the word svart as meaning black, but then also Negro black. So once again, the term Negro was a term that has been customarily applied to so-called black people for a very, very long time. And as we've been able to see from our earlier investigations into the term Negris and even Niger, right? The word Negro derives from the same base word or root word as Negris, right? Which is Niger, which all Niger means is black, and it was a term that was applied to so-called black people for thousands of years, right? So the term Negro, of course, is meant to imply that somebody who's called svart, which just means black, they must be a quote-unquote Negro. They must exhibit quote-unquote Negro traits, right? So the word svart, which once again was the name of the man that we just looked at, Halfdan the Black, or Halfdan Svart, and another way that you can read Halfdan's name as Halfdan or Halfdanar Svart is Halfdan the Swarthy. That's another thing that people who had that last name Svart or Svarti had applied to their name. Like for example, you had Otar Svarti or Otar the Swarthy. He was a very, very famous Icelandic skaldic poet or Viking poet, Scandinavian poet, whatever you want to call him. And his name was Otar Svarti or Otar the Swarthy. You can go and you can look him up. And we've already been able to ascertain what the term swarthy means. right? So the word swarthy, or the associated term with the word swarthy, which is swart, derives from swart. Okay. So once again, this term swart is a word that, like swarthy and swart, it's a word that is meant to imply a so-called black person. Okay. So, but if you remember, I mentioned that Halfdan the Black was part of the Yingling dynasty, which was the first noble dynasty in Sweden, right? So he was from the Swedish dynasty. He was of Swedish descent. So now let's just prove real quick here that the Yingling dynasty was in fact a dynasty comprised of so-called black people. All right, so now we're back in the Ancient and Modern Britons book, and this little entry right here is going to give us an understanding of what the Yinglings looked like, right? The Yinglings being the tribe or the house that Halfdan the Black derived from, right? The first Swedish noble dynasty of Sweden, right? That's where Halfdan the Black derived from. So let's read real quick what this has to say about the Yinglings. Okay, so in the Scandinavian mythology, there is mention of a race known as the Yinglings, of the syllable ying be taken as equivalent to ing, which Hollywood defines as a meadow, generally one lying low near a river. Then these people would be Matei, like the swarthy Damani or Moors. And if ling be accepted in its diminutive sense, then the Yinglings were marsh dwarfs, that they were probably one with the Svertlings or black dwarfs will be pointed out afterwards. Alright, so the Yinglings here are being likened unto a group of people known as the Svertlings. So once again, Svert is just an alternative form of Svart. Okay, Svert and Svart, those mean the same exact things. And so the word Svertlings is meant to act as another word that means black dwarves, okay? And the black dwarves, or the black dwarfs, were likened unto the Yinglings. The Yinglings were likened unto the black dwarfs. Okay, so the Yinglings, as this entry shows us here, were so-called, they were black. Alright, so that should give us a better understanding of why Halfdan the Black, or Halfdanar Svarti, as his name reads in the Norse language, if I'm not mistaken, was called Halfdan the Black. Okay, he was called Halfdan the Black or Halfdan Svarti, which we've already been able to see links up with the word Negro, right? In the last definition that we saw of the word Svart, it links up with the word Negro. And then, of course, we've been able to see where the term Negro comes from, that being Niger, right, which just means black, and was a term that was used to describe a so-called black person, or a black man, or a black woman. Okay, that last name Savarti, or that name Savarti, was given to him because he was black. He was a black man. Okay, and once again, he derived from the Yingling or Swedish noble dynasty. And as we can see here, the Yinglings were in fact black. So that should give us an idea of who the people of Sweden were said to have looked like, or what a lot of the people of Sweden must have looked like. All right. So now, if you remember, I stated that the son of Halfdan the Black was a man by the name of Harold Fairhair. And so Harold Fairhair went on to become the king of unified Norway. Okay, so the Norwegians, of course, were also another Scandinavian tribe, or another group of Scandinavian peoples. Okay, so now let's read something here that will confirm that there was a so-called black element amongst even the Norwegians, even though the Norwegians are likened unto the Fingal or the Finn-Genti. Right, remember those two words? Finn-Genti, or fair Gentile, or Fingal, or fair foreigner. All right, so but let's just look and see to confirm that there was a quote-unquote black contingency amongst even the Norwegians. All right, so let's read this highlighted portion here. So the Norwegian brunettes differ from the typical blondes of that country in two other particulars. First, they are broad-headed, while the blondes, which comprise the bulk of the nation, are long-headed. And not only are the broader-headed people of these coast districts darker as a whole, but in them the broad-headed individuals tend to be darker than the other type, as Arbo has clearly shown. Okay, so once again, so we see here that this term brunette was and was referencing the Norwegians, or a specific type of Norwegian amongst the Norwegian amongst the Norwegian constituency. They were regarded as being quote unquote brunette. So that word brunette, in the context of this sentence right here, seems to imply them being quote unquote brunette when it comes to their hair color. But the term brunette is a word that has not always just meant having brown or dark hair color, and I'm gonna just prove that in a little bit here. So it could be that the Norwegian brunettes are referring to them having quote unquote brown or dark hair, but it could also mean that they are being referred to as brunettes because they were, they had brunette skin color. They had a brunette skin color. Okay, like when you read about one of the wives, one of the wives of King Henry VIII, Anne Boleyn, she's oftentimes described as being a brunette, right? Or somebody who has dark skin color or brunette skin color, okay? And I think even her daughter, Elizabeth I, who was also, of course, the daughter of King Henry VIII, she was also regarded as being of darker skin color. Like you can get a book about Elizabeth I, called The Life of Elizabeth I by a woman by the name of Alison Weir. She's a very famous United Kingdom author, or a very famous author of the United Kingdom. But anyway, in the book, she describes Elizabeth I as being swarthy, according to a cardinal who existed back during that time period. I think his name was like Cardinal Thomas Wolsey or something like that. But you can look that up. Okay, so but once again, that term brunette was applied to Anne Boleyn, who was she was described as being brunette or dark skin or brown skin. Okay, but that's another story for another day. But another thing that we can see down here is that they're being referred to as broad-headed. So once again, that word broad-headed, it just means brachycephalic, and we should know what that means by now. All right, and then but it even goes on to state that the other group of Norwegians were long-headed. So now this could possibly be a bit of an alteration of the truth, because with the long-headed or the longer-headed people that we've seen thus far, they've all been quote-unquote black people. Okay, so this could be a bit of an alteration of the truth here, because if in fact these people who are being regarded as the quote-unquote blondes, which would imply that they were quote-unquote white or Caucasian, if they're being regarded as blonde or Caucasian and long-headed, that could possibly be, once again, just a little bit of a alteration of the truth of what they actually looked like. Okay, but that'll be another video for later on. But let's just look at the word brunette real quick, just to close things out. So brunette, of a woman dark in complexion, having a brownish tone to the skin and hair. 1660s from French brunette, femme brunette from Old French brunette, brownish, brown hair, dark complexion. Femme, diminutive of brun. Once again, remember that name Brun, right? Brunson. As I stated earlier, the last name Brunson just means brown or brown skin. All right, so West Germanic origin, from Proto-Germanic brunas. All right, so woman with dark hair and eyes of a dark complexion. So once again, Anne Boleyn was described as being brunette. Okay, so the term brunette was applied to her because she had brunette skin complexion. As this states right here, brunette skin complexion or dark skin complexion. Alright, so let me see. So yeah, that's probably going to be it. So that's pretty much going to conclude volume 2. So now, of course, the transition into volume 3 is going to consist of an even more deeper investigation into the Scandinavians' origins and how it relates to the people of the Bible known as the nation of Israel. Okay, because the Scandinavians do in fact have a certain relation to, or their ancestry does in fact trace back to the nation of Israel from the Bible. That'll be in volume 3. So this is going to conclude volume 2, and head over to volume 3. All right, so peace.